In the life of every sex addict, there comes a moment of decision where they need to decide whether or not they're willing to do the work it takes to get sober or get well. Whenever I think about that question, I first of all think about it in my own life. I became aware of the concept of sexual addiction a couple of years before the Lord brought me to a place of readiness where I was intervened on and finally accepted help. So, I personally know that it's a struggle. There's that part of every addict that for so many years has been desperately seeking help and wanting God to provide a magical answer and a solution. There's another part of every addict that thinks that they can do it on their own, they don't need help, I can quit tomorrow, that kind of thing. When I think about this question, the scripture passage that has always come to my mind is the story in John chapter 5 of the pool of Bethesda. That was a healing pool that, according to tradition, when an angel would come down and stir the waters, any person who would be the first person into that pool would receive healing. The Bible describes in the opening verses of chapter 5 that there came to lie by this pool the blind, the lame, and the paralyzed. I've always found that kind of challenging. You're blind, or you're lame, or you're paralyzed, and you have to be the first person in the pool. It's kind of an inherently competitive situation. The Bible also describes in this particular story that there was a man who had been paralyzed for 38 years. I like to think about all of these stories as metaphors, analogies for where the sex addict is today. I mean, how many of us addicts, how many of you maybe watching or pastors dealing with someone, could say that we've been paralyzed with this addiction for, however many years. I know in my case it was 37, so I was only one short of the Bible story here. I've also always felt that if myself as a psychologist, if I only had to study the conversations that Jesus has with people, I mean, that would be almost enough education in itself on how to treat people. Now, in this story, this man who's been paralyzed for 38 years, he's lying by the pool of Bethesda. He obviously can't walk, and in all of these years, he hasn't been able to be the first one in the pool. Jesus encounters this scene and comes across this man, and in the story, you have to begin thinking, what is Jesus going to say to this person? Is he just going to heal him, or what's he going to do? In all of my years of training, either in college, seminary, or in graduate school, I never really learned how to ask this kind of a direct question. I learned how to take an interview, how to do a diagnosis, how to be empathetic, how to be an active listener. My competitive self says to me, I could help you get into the pool. My empathetic self says, this must be hard. My active listening self says, what do you have to tell me about this? My diagnostic self would like to know how you got this way in the first place. How did this paralysis happen? Jesus doesn't waste any time with any of that. He just basically, I get the image of he's just looking directly into the eye of this paralyzed man, and he says, do you want to get well? And that's the question that every sex addict needs to begin with. And it's not going to be a one-time answer. I want to say that up front. I feel that even today, after 20 years of sobriety, after fully saying that, God has blessed me with purity and fidelity over that time, there's still not a day that goes by living in our current culture that I don't ask myself in an ongoing question, do I want to be well? Do I want to continue to be free of this addiction? Do I want to be sexually pure? Do I want to be faithful to my wife? In other words, in short, do I want to be well? Now, there's one really important thing that I think every addict needs to realize, and I certainly recognize it in myself historically, and that is that when I first looked at this question, like I said earlier, there was a part of me that wanted to be free of this, and there's a part of me that didn't. That part of me that didn't was that little boy who learned how even early on these sexual things, these exciting things, this fantasy stuff, and later on the actual acting out itself, these were ways that I coped with the pain that I was in. As such, and this is kind of sometimes hard to understand, my addiction became almost like my best friend. I mean, it was It was always there. It never asked any questions. It was available to me 24/7. I just had to go even into the fantasies of my own brain. And whenever I felt lonely, whenever I felt frightened or anxious or angry, and I wanted to get rid of that feeling, I just had to turn to my sexual thoughts. As such, it was a constant companion. So when challenged, even by my own Christian faith, to give it up, there was a part of me that said, this is like saying goodbye to my best friend, my good friend, the way that I've survived for all of these years. And I want you watching to hear the fact that, I personally know that this is a struggle. This is not a black and white issue. There was, again, a part of me that wanted to be free, that was desperate for that to happen, that was incredibly frightened of any consequences, losing my wife and family. But there was another stubborn and, honestly, a prideful part of myself that didn't want to give this up. The Bible describes that many of us are like this in terms of our indecision. The Jewish people, the entire history of their nation is basically indecision about how much they're going to trust the Lord. James, the brother of Christ, in his letter talks about in the first chapter that the man who is unable to fully trust God is like the waves of the sea. He's tossed to and fro. At the end of this section, James says, that man is a double-minded man. So addicts, I believe, are double-minded. There's that desperate part that wants to get well, and there's that incredibly equal desperate part that wants to hold on to the addiction. So I'm just simply asking you not to jump up right now, like you're going forward to the altar. You've probably already done that a number of times, and try to give this up. I'm wanting you to struggle with that question today and for the rest of your life. Today, if you want to get well, there's definitely some things that you can do. The first thing that you can do is to get completely honest with someone about this addiction that you've been struggling with all your life. If you are a pastor watching this and you're dealing with a person who isn't completely willing, sometimes we just need to let people go on for a while until such time as they do get willing. I think, many times, I know myself now as a therapist, as a counselor, as a pastor myself, that I encounter men that aren't completely willing. They're in denial. They're angry at God. They're angry at themselves. They're angry at their spouse. They're in this double-minded place. I, decided years ago that I wasn't going to waste a lot of energy on that guy until he was ready to hear the things or the teaching that I have to offer. I've always taken great comfort in the story of Jesus when he talks to this rich young man. This is another one of those great conversations that I think we need to pay attention to, that he has with this guy who comes to him and says, how do I inherit eternal life? Jesus says, of course, first, you obey the law and the prophets. The guy says, I've been doing that, but it still doesn't seem to bring me that sense of peace or fulfillment that I seek. And Jesus says, well, you're incredibly right and wise. What you need to do is give up everything you have and follow me. That's kind of the same message we have for the addicts. You need to give up this addiction and follow Christ. Well, the rich young man in that story was simply not able to give up everything that he had. He wasn't ready. Now, the part, though, that I think sometimes we miss is that the disciples, I think, were probably standing around, particularly maybe Judas, the treasurer of this group, was saying to Jesus, this guy is rich. Let's go after him. He could be a major contributor to our cause. But Jesus doesn't do that. He just basically lets him go. And Jesus then, of course, in response to the disciples says, it's easier for a camel to get through the eye of a needle than a rich man to get into the kingdom of heaven. I'd like to just directly talk into the heart of an addict. And there's something that may surprise you because obviously you know at this point that I've been in recovery myself from sexual addiction, and I've been sober from this disease for 20 years. A lot of people think, are you done? Do you never have a sexual temptation again? And this, again, goes back to that question about willingness. Just think about the fact that we live in a totally sexually saturated culture. Today, in this current time, as I'm talking to you now, when I leave this place and go out into the world, watch television tonight, go to the shopping mall, whatever it is I do, go out to eat, there's going to be a barrage of sexual temptation, sexual images, sexual messages. It would sometimes seem that everyone in the world is acting out sexually, and that life is passing me by, and that there's things out there to take advantage of. What I'm trying to say is that I don't think recovery is ever that black and white. There's not necessarily a time where I could say all temptation is over, all temptation is gone. There's never going to be a day when I don't have maybe a fleeting thought, gee, it would be nice. That's my old addictive self that's still kind of, a part of my spirit. So again, even after making healthy choices for the last 20 years, we're still in a daily battle. I've still got to be willing today, when I go out into the world, that I am going to make a decision to be faithful to my wife, to be sexually pure, to be an example of the man God calls me to be. This is an ongoing thing. My encouragement to you is to not beat yourself up. That's kind of what we say in recovery. Don't be too hard on yourself. If you don't have a perfect attitude about this, that's not a problem. Give me 51%. Give God 51%. And God can take that extra 1% and He can do some miracles. So don't be alone. Talk to somebody. Reach out for some help. You'll be, believe me, very glad you did, and not a very long time from now.